and welcome back to Reverse Shot, the show where we take the camera, turn it around, and look at the foibles and the successes of the press. And with me today to discuss, well, one of the successes of the press when we actually do something right is Steven Monacelli, who wrote a piece for the Texas Observer. And I'll read the headline, ICE prosecutor in Dallas runs white supremacist X account. He broke this story about a week ago, and I won't go through the entire thing, but Steve, I guess I'll start by asking you, the question I get from a lot of fans of MAGA, come on, man, that's all, you're making that up, that's fake news. Lay it on me, brother. It's not, is it?
Well, I think we've gone to great lengths to demonstrate in the article that this is indeed not fake news. In fact, not only did we do an extensive investigation and show a lot of our homework here in this article, but
yes, you did.
I even sat behind the ICE prosecutor in question during immigration court hearings in a courtroom that's quite small. So I was about 6 feet away from the guy and could clearly see over his left shoulder, and I, in fact, saw him scrolling through his Twitter feed and even drafting a post. And the anonymous account that we linked him to made a post 1 minute after I timestamped him drafting on his phone. So, I don't think this is fake news. We've gone to great length as well to contact this prosecutor to ask them for their side of the story, to either confirm or deny it. We've also brought this to ICE and to DHS. And so far, no one has denied anything. No one has tried to poke any holes into our findings.
I want to talk a little bit about how no one not only has not poked any holes in it, but what this guy is, and it's Glomer Responder, I think, right? Created in 2012. Yeah. Some of the posts are, I mean, not only outlandish, but frightening. Quote, America is a white nation founded by whites. Our country should favor us. All blacks are foreign to my people. Dumb fuck. Freedom of association hasn't existed in this country since 1964. I'm not a commie, I'm a fascist. One of my favorites, I have to say. At least they know the difference in ideology. But frightening as that is, the fact that this guy's responsibility, explain what his day job is. His right. Night job may be flaming fanning the flames of fascism, but his day job is something different. Explain his day job and who he is.
So the person we're talking about, his name is James Rodden, and he is an assistant chief counsel for ICE in their office of the principal legal advisor. There are many of these offices across the country. Anywhere that there's an immigration court, these ICE lawyers are there. So right. He is in one of those offices in the Dallas area where he represents ICE in these hearings as the prosecuting attorney, in hearings that could result in someone being deported or removed from the country. So he is actively playing a role in removal hearings in the deportation process, while simultaneously, through his anonymous account, spreading extremely xenophobic, racist, anti-migrant sentiment. One you didn't read, which I think is quite concerning, is, quote, nobody is proposing feeding migrants into tree shredders yet. Give it a few more weeks at this level of invasion, and that will be the moderate position. So this is someone who you can see that their stated views have a direct relation to their work and, in fact, could present a conflict of interest with their work, which involves following the law.
Yes. If you're a cogent human being, it's obvious it's a conflict of interest. But for the MAGA members out there, they say it aligns perfectly. He's prosecuting him, and they should leave him be. My concern about I have many concerns, but having worked that border for years, it frightens me how people still buy, the rate of invasion. This isn't an invasion. And honestly, the last time I was on the border, I spent 5 years doing nothing but border coverage, but or in politics, same thing. But in the last 2 years, I've been there several times. The rate of influx of illegal immigrants has not risen dramatically over the years, and it is this constant belief or statements. And I'm glad you read that one. That this they call it an invasion, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
So this is someone who believes that, and I just wanted to pull up some of his tweets. He's someone who believes in or has proposed the Great Replacement theory, which is this idea that has roots in basically white supremacist culture and thought that asserts there is this vague globalist cabal of people who are intentionally encouraging illegal immigration in order to intentionally replace
white people,
white populations. And so this used to be a fringe idea. It has increasingly become normalized in no small part due to people such as this. And so he clearly views migration to be not only just a threat to white dominance, but also an intentional plot by Democrats, by vague globalists to do this. It's not that it's a part of the natural consequences of global capitalism. It's not that it has anything to do with the effects of climate change or foreign policy or any of these other drivers of migration, but that it is this conspiracy, basically. And so this is someone who, I'll read one. The Great Replacement isn't a theory. It's an explicit policy of replacing white people in their homelands, and they brag about doing it. So, this isn't someone who is just concerned that, maybe we have too much migration and we need to figure out how to, get people into pathways that are legal for migration and apply some sort of logic to that. I mean, there are lots of countries that have those debates. This is something else, I think. This is something more hateful and much more rooted in supremacist logic.
Well, when they start using terms invasion, that's when you start understanding where their thought process is that white people are somehow being replaced purposely, and that we've lost control. White people have lost control of the country to, anybody but white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So I guess I fall into the outside of that one. But my question for you, and I want to switch gears a little bit, because we've established pretty much how dangerous this is and how a conflict of interest, how much of a conflict of interest it is. But in today's world of journalism, how difficult is it for you to put this type of story together? What extra, coming up as a reporter, and I don't think that's changed too much to get vetted facts, but to get the word out there. So like I said at the beginning, I stated that you have MAGA people who believe that this is all made up, and that we are part and parcel, part of the problem, that we're involved as reporters in disseminating disinformation that aids the invasion and the Great Replacement theory. There's a whole grand conspiracy theory about it. How much difficult does that make your job on the ground as a reporter?
It doesn't necessarily make my job that much more difficult. I think it's a problem that is clearly occurring in our country. We've had this massive polarization in terms of people, where they get their news and what they're willing to even believe is potentially in the realm of truth. So it's sort of like a thought terminating cliche to be able to say that's fake news. I think what's more challenging right now is that a lot of outlets are scared to run stories like this for reasons that have less to do with the average sort of right-wing media consumer and their feelings about truth, and more to do with people who have power, who are willing to wield that power against outlets that report the truth like this uncomfortable truth. And so we've seen, lawsuits from Trump against news outlets be settled in part because there's this fear that the federal government could be used to go after these outlets. I have been frivolously sued in the past by a very wealthy right-wing person because of my reporting that was true. And we won that lawsuit. But nonetheless, that sort of lawsuit or that sort of threat,
that's what anti-SLAPP legislation is for, but it's woefully lacking in many states, including Texas.
And not only that, but if the point is to cause pain, it doesn't really matter if you win in the long run. If you don't have pro bono representation, you're losing time, you're losing money. I mean, you're losing time regardless, but you're losing money as well. And so it's a way for people who are more powerful to bleed people who are less powerful or who are less wealthy. And if you look at the average news outlet, I mean, they have less and less cushion financially to absorb that sort of frivolous lawsuit. So not only is there the lawsuit threat, but then there's the threat of being totally iced out, pun intended, of any sort of official proceedings where, White House correspondents are getting kicked out because their parent company won't call it the Gulf of America instead of the Gulf of Mexico. And that's a pretext, right? You could argue that's just a pretext for punishing an outlet that the president doesn't like. It's an intimidation technique aimed at the strongest to enforce, and you don't have to go after the weakest. If you can bully the strongest, the weakest will fall in line. I know well aware of what that's all about. But your point locally is where I think what people miss the most. Anti-SLAPP legislation, which is, these are strategic lawsuits against public participation laws. What you were talking about, the rich basically trying to bully the poor, the reporters. And there was the case in Kansas, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, where the police raided the newspaper. The poor woman who owned it died. I mean, she had a heart attack because of it. And they lost eventually in court. The government did. But the fact of the matter is, these are growing in number, not shrinking. And there are 45% of the counties in the country. Texas Observer, very good, has always been a good publication. But publications like that have ceased to exist. 45% of the counties in this country, 45, that's nearly half of them, have no local news, have no one like the Observer. So what you're talking about is what we don't see. We see the bullying up top with the president going after the AP. What we don't see is the erosion of the foundation of journalism underneath. Yeah, and that's a business model problem. I mean, nobody has solved that. I used to work for Google before I became a journalist, and so I can safely say that my former employer is part of the reason why local journalism's main source of revenue dried up. They no longer had this monopoly on advertising for small businesses, for local businesses. People found new other ways of getting business.
And cheaper and reaching more people, yes.
And Google as a search engine, is it less useful than it maybe used to be? Sure. But is it still very useful? Yes, absolutely. So we're not going to be able to get rid of that. We're not going to be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube. So local journalism needs to be funded in some other way. We need to find some new way to fund local journalism and to sustain it, if we actually believe that it is a critical part of our democracy, which I do.
I do.
Personally, I believe so.
Well, and without people without reporters in city council, county council meetings, corruption, flourishes. And
That's right.
they have even gotten rid of them. I've spoken in legislatures across the country about public service ads and public notice ads that the government has said they can do better on their own websites. So they take that. And that could be that's operating capital for small newspapers. Those public service ads. So either you're going to have to subsidize local newspapers, tax breaks, tax subsidies for hiring reporters, or you're going to have to just make them totally, nonprofit, and that's not a viable alternative either, unfortunately. But
not at scale.
I want to wrap up with this. This piece. Where's it going? Where do you think this is going to lead to? I'm sure there are going to be a lot more stories about this, but tell me where you see this going.
Well, I think it depends on if enough people pay attention to it and make their voices heard about it. I think we've already seen quite a bit of pickup, but I've also been surprised that some local outlets have not made a peep about it. And ultimately, I don't mean to be too pessimistic nor too optimistic. I think it's kind of a 50-50 at this point in time, whether anything's going to change because of this reporting. It's not my job or responsibility for things to change after my reporting comes out. But based on what we've been seeing recently, like specifically I'm thinking of the one young Doge staffer who had been found to have posted pro-eugenics comments on the internet, was basically pressured to resign and then reinstated. That makes me think that nothing might change here. And in my view, there's two sort of outcomes, broadly speaking. It's either there's some sort of accountability, some sort of, consequence because of this, or we learn one more example of the sort of character of this administration and
and of our country,
where they're willing to stand and what they're willing to stand by. So, that is how I see it. We're either going to have, maybe a small little victory in terms of making our government a little more accountable, or we might learn something horrible about our government.
Well, what are you going to learn and publish in the future about it? You're following the story, I suppose.
Oh, certainly. Well, I think we're going to continue to follow whether this person is working in immigration court, whether they continue to represent the government. I can tell you that Congressman Mark Vesey in Dallas has already issued a public statement saying that this needs to be fully investigated, that this is unacceptable, that ICE needs to provide answers, and that this person should not be in their job. Whether anything comes of that, I will certainly be following along. And I will certainly be reporting if there is any change or if there's not. Either way.
Okay, so my question, and this is just me being, I'm not conspiratorial minded. I'm merely a reporter. Any chance that he's not alone? This isn't a solo effort. Is there any indication that there are others involved in such efforts?
I shouldn't say anything along those lines at this time. I think that would be a bit too speculative. But we will certainly be.
You would investigate?
I am certainly interested in any sort of tips that might lead me to finding more people who have this sort of mindset and have publicly stated it, even if anonymously. In fact, I think that is exactly the kind of thing that I hope to find, because ultimately we need to know what ideological undercurrents are motivating this administration and its people. That is the best way, in my view, of understanding, in addition to their actions, which can tell us a lot. We need to understand what these people are saying in private, what they say when they think they're safe to say it, and how that connects to those actions. Because there's all this debate about, is this fascist? Is this just illiberal? Is there another word for it? And, if someone who works for ICE, who is a big fan of the administration, is telling me that they're a fascist, I'm going to believe them.
Yes. Well, and the fact that they know the difference between communism and fascism does impress me somewhat, because most don't. But as a reporter, I'll tell you that's well spoken, because I would be very curious myself, if I'm covering this story, if there are any indication that this is not an isolated incident and an isolated example, because that would tell me more about the mindset of those doing the job than merely if it was just an isolated example of one guy. So that's that's the story, and God bless you. Good luck in covering it, and Godspeed, sir, because you're going to be stirring up a hornet's nest, and that's always fun. Just make sure you're wearing your beekeeper's outfit when you do it. But this is Reverse Shot. I am your host, Brian Karem. I want to thank Steven Monacelli for being with us today as we discuss the issues that go on in the press and how they affect us all. So thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time. Steve, anything you want to, anything you want to say before we take off? What do you want to plug?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Please follow me on social media. I'm mostly on Blue Sky. I'm still on Twitter/X. They haven't banned me yet, even though I've been banned before. And what I will say, I'll plug that posters behind me are for the nonprofit magazine that I publish.
There you go.
So we just started sending these out. Our latest issue. It's lovely, beautiful. It's like 112 full color pages of essays, fiction, poetry, really nice art, and it's all for basically $20.
There you go.
You can get this, and that includes shipping. And all that money basically goes to paying writers and artists to be writers and artists. I don't make money off of it personally. So yeah, check it out. We're online too, and we publish online. And please support the Texas Observer. Proteanmag.com, and then texasobserver.org, and then I am StevanZetti, Steve Vanzetti on Blue Sky.
There you go. And I am Brian Karem. This is Reverse Shot. We want to thank you for joining us. We'll catch you next time.